Peace, y'all. Peace, y'all. Hello, friends and family. I hope everyone is doing well. Everybody doing well, right? Everybody doing all right? All right, all right. I'm just checking. Thank you so much for being here. I really can't put into words how excited I am to be here, so I'm not even going to try to put that into words. Just know that I am excited. Thank you so much, Joel. Thank you so much, Creative Mornings, for having me here and giving me a chance to kick it early in the morning with y'all. For some of y'all, it may not feel like it's early in the morning, but for a teacher who has really made it his duty to do nothing over the summer until it's time to come back to school, this is quite early. But nevertheless, we got the coffee and we are ready to go. So a couple things about me. I would guess my intro would go a little something like this. My name is Jabari Sellars. I use he, him, his pronouns. And I am originally from Durham, North Carolina. Shout out to Bull City. I see a hand in the back, let's go. And I am a proud product of Durham Public Schools. So after graduating from high school, I went to Guilford College, where my mentor teacher took me by the shoulders one day after class, shook me by the shoulders, and told me, boy, you are going to teach. And the thing is, it was one of those things that I had known in my mind, like, I'm going to teach. This is something that I want to do. This is something that is calling me. But have you ever had a mentor? Have you ever had someone that you look up to kind of speak your identity, kind of speak your dreams and your pathway into existence? Well, that's what Carolyn Beard Whitlow did to me when she pulled me aside and said, you are going to teach. So after graduating from Guilford College, I did not go into teaching. Instead, I took a year and I worked as an after-school counselor and a camp counselor at Durham Parks and Recreation. And it only took one summer of cargo shorts, bug spray, kickball, sticky faces from elementary school kids for me to say it's time for me to go back into the classroom. And so I applied to Duke's MAT program, Masters of Arts in Teaching program, and that's where I got my teaching license. After graduating from Duke, I went back to the school district that helped raise me, and I taught English in Durham Public Schools for 2 years before I came up here to DC, where I taught at Murray School as well as Ron Brown College Preparatory High School here in DC. Then in 2018, I thought to myself, I need to learn more about education, and also I need to add even more student debt. So I decided to go right back into graduate school. And in 2018, I graduated from Harvard's Language and Literacy program, and now I'm back in the classroom. So for all intents and purposes, for the past 10 years, I have been playing double dutch between two identities, teacher and student, educator and learner, and just been bouncing back and forth. And the thing about those 10 years, the thing about it, I've had the opportunity to be part of some of the greatest and awesomest learning environments, and most importantly, I've had the opportunity to teach some of the dopest human beings on planet Earth. So shout out to my students, whom I cannot live without, every last one of them. Now here's the thing, whether I've been a teacher or a learner, whether I've been a student or an educator, it really doesn't matter, because deep down inside, the one thing that I have always been and that I will always be is a proud nerd. And here's the thing, y'all, I come by it honest, because I was raised by the dopest pair of black nerds I know in the world, my mother and father. And they just recently celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary, getting up there, look at that. The oldest blurred couple I know. Now, for those of y'all who are thinking, wait a minute, a blurred couple? Let me learn you really quickly. So, a blend word, portmanteau, connects black and nerd. So we're still rocking the same things. We're still watching the same TV shows. We're still reading the same comic books, but 9 times out of 10, we're looking at it with a different kind of lens, a critical lens. For example, we may have all loved watching Power Rangers. He knows where I'm going. We may have all loved Power Rangers, but for many of my fellow blurds, Zach and his hip-hop keto has a special place in our hearts, and also a problematic place, because why is the Black Ranger black? But we can move on. So I come from a house of blurds. So that means in my house, things like the X-Files, Star Trek: The Next Generation. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. The X-Files spinoff, Millennium. Anyone? The 4400 that has a young Mahershala Ali, who will now be Blade in the upcoming Marvel comic universe. Even episodes of Frasier and the occasional episode of The Critic, it was all appointment television in my house. But there was one TV show above them all that could get my parents to sit down and to get their eyes glued to the television screen. Jeopardy. So here's the thing, y'all. There are many people here. We all have different ways of living life. And most importantly, we all have different ways of watching Jeopardy. Now, for some of us, we're really kind and thoughtful, and so we sit there quietly, whether we're alone or with a group of friends watching Jeopardy, and we silently answer the questions. We recognize that people have waiting times and people need time to think about the answers, so we don't want to spoil anything to yell it out, to yell out an answer, to yell out a bid, because hey, everyone needs to participate, everyone needs to be part of the game. Or you're like my parents, who in their heart of hearts believe that they are the fourth contestant that Alex just forgot to send an invitation to the studio. It's like it's in the mail. And so every single weekday, my older brother and I would sit between my mother and father and just watch them go through every single category as quickly and as loudly as possible to declare themselves the smartest person in the house until 7 o'clock tomorrow. Usually, my brother and I, we just sat there, enjoyed listening to our parents going back and forth, but really the categories kind of went over our heads. Honestly, at that age, if it didn't have anything to do with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Power Rangers, honestly, you could kind of miss us with it. Except for one day. So one day, we're watching Jeopardy. First round is already gone. We're back from commercial. Alex has already interviewed everyone and talking about their lives. And so we're back here with Double Jeopardy. And at the beginning, all the categories were the same kind of categories that my brother and I just kind of, who cares? So a little before and after, a little Victorian poetry. I think there was like a potpourri category. You know, I had no idea what potpourri was, but it was in there. And then it happened. Because the next category, I don't recall it being the final category that he said. It may have been, it may not have been, but I stopped listening after he said these two words that changed the Sellars household forever. Video games. Now look, y'all. When Alex said video games, games, there was no echo. There was no echo. I heard an echo. And so my brother and I, we looked at each other, we gave a smirk. You can't say but so much in front of my parents, so we can't talk but so much trash. So all we did was just look at our parents with that same smirk. Didn't say anything, but the message was clear. Mother, father, when this category gets picked, don't even bother answering. Don't bother pressing your imaginary buzzer. Don't worry about any wagers that you want to set because we got this. This is our category. So at the beginning of the day, if you can take a look at your name tag, for those of you who have the name tag, the sentence starter that I wanted to rock today, that I had folks fill out today, answered this question. The category I would absolutely crush on Jeopardy is blank. So, because I'm a teacher, we're gonna take a quick second to do a couple popcorn pieces. I just wanna know what would be that category. Anyone wanna share their category? Talk to me. Disney movies, let's go. What's another category? Astrology, I'm here for it. Any other categories where it's like, yo, no one else should try because I got this? Say what now? I'm here for it, alpine ski racing, let's go. Venues. Yes. Star Trek, indeed, indeed. Procrastination techniques, all of them. Yes. Graphic novels, let's do this. All of the skits, SNL comedy skits. Y'all, these are amazing categories, and I really hope Jeopardy is listening once they see this. Yes? Celebrity gossip. All of the tea, every single drop. So I asked you all to fill in that sentence. The category that I would absolutely crush is, but I also had a question that I wanted you to answer, but it was just too long for the name tag. And the question is, how would you react if Alex Trebek called out that category that you would absolutely crush on Jeopardy? What would you do? What does that feel like when you hear that? And we can push back from Jeopardy. If you're at a bar and you're playing trivia, or if you're at a hangout and you hear someone talking about an idea or a practice or a concept that is your passion, that you've studied, that you're just hip to, what happens? Maybe you're like me, and you let out a mixture of a gasp and a squeal, just like, oh! Because you're so excited for that mixture of confidence and inclusion. Or maybe you're like my brother who decided to betray me and not keep it silent between my parents and I and just yell out, oh yeah! When I thought we agreed that we were just gonna be silent and just play the game. What happens to you? What is that feeling? It may give you a sense of confidence. It may make you think about bragging about your abilities or your idea, but perhaps beneath all of that is a sense of belonging. That in this conversation, that in this space, that even in a game of Jeopardy, you now have the space to be yourself. You have the space to share your expertise, to share your ideas. So two things happened while we were watching the second round of Double Jeopardy. First thing that you have to know and that everyone needs to know is my brother and I just killed it. Every single question we answered flawlessly, and then there was a Double Jeopardy, and I decided to wager $1 bajillion. I had no money, but after that question, I had $2 bajillion. So you do what you want with that. So that's the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened was when my father turned to my mother right after they delivered the final Jeopardy category. So, you know, after they deliver the final Jeopardy category, they go to commercial, and then we come back. During that commercial break, my father turned to my mother laughingly and said, of all the things to give a category, Jeopardy went and wasted its time with video games. Now, here's the thing, y'all. I'd like to tell you that in that moment, as a little kid, I was thinking to myself, wow, I'm discouraged. I'm hurt. How can my father think this? But I was too high off of the victory on the video games category. Y'all, there was a question about Battletoads. For those of y'all who don't know about Battletoads, it's a video game about giant toads fighting mutant rats and pigs. Y'all, they had a question about Battletoads. Years later, however, I did think about what my father said. And yes, it was in a joke, and yes, perhaps he was just a little bit salty because his son just kind of just showed him up that 7:30 that one weekday. But I did leave thinking about it later on. And I came up with two ideas, or I had two thoughts after I reflected on my father's scoffing about video games. The first thing that I thought was, my goodness, look what happens. Look what people can do when they're given the opportunity to share their interests, their ideas, their identities, their expertise in a given venue. Look what happens when we give people space, when we acknowledge and celebrate what they know, what they can do, what they want to do, what they want to know. And then the second thought was, how many people do we exclude on a daily basis because we hold fast to these specific definitions and standards of what is worthy? I think about my father, right? This is just Jeopardy, but behind my father laughing and saying of all the things to make a category was the message of, I don't believe a knowledge of video games is worthy for Jeopardy. And in my father's mind, Jeopardy is the prestigious game show. It is the competition for intellectuals. How in the world, in my father's eyes, could there be a space for video games? So what do we do when we exclude? What do we do when we decide that isn't good enough? That isn't fitting in our description. That isn't part of the standard. That's not meeting the standard. What happens to us when we allow those voices and those ideas to control our actions? Or, in other words, what happens when we allow the gatekeepers to rule? So let's put another word up there. We have blurred, right? Shout out to blurs. Let's talk a little bit about gatekeepers or gatekeeping, this gatekeeping mentality. So a gatekeeper, you could classify them as a person or a group that takes it upon themselves to determine whether or not a new idea, a new work, a new practice fits in an arbitrary definition of a genre, a style, a technique, or an identity. Oftentimes we see gatekeepers in the form of people shouting out, "This isn't real," and then insert something. This isn't real or authentic cuisine. This isn't real music. This isn't real art. In my mind, I have to admit, whenever I hear the word gatekeeper, an image comes to mind. The image that comes to mind is Ian McKellen playing Gandalf the Grey, shouting, "You shall not pass." But instead of shouting, "You shall not pass," he says something kind of gatekeepery like, "SoundCloud rap is the death of hip hop." Or, "Not my Ariel," some real problematic. At the end of it all, these gatekeepers have just put it upon themselves to let us know that these new ideas, this new way of thinking, this new way of creating, that's cool and all, but it doesn't belong here. And we see it everywhere. We see it everywhere from the classroom. We see it everywhere on our fields of play, in our studios, in our conversations, the ways in which we decide, hey, this is not the space for you. And goodness knows I saw it in my classroom. So I have had the privilege of teaching at 4 of the dopest schools ever. And at each school, I noticed in classrooms so many students disengaged. And let me not just say, oh, I've noticed them in other people's classrooms. I most definitely noticed them in my classroom. There were times when it felt like I was just talking to myself. It felt like I was Ben Stein and Ferris Bueller just asking anyone, please contribute. But here's the thing, I noticed this pattern. I would get nothing out of my students in the class when it came to conversing, when it came to talking about the book that we read, when it came to talking about the questions or the characters of a book or a text. But the moment the bell rang and lunchtime came around, the students still stayed in my classroom, but they began having conversations about everything. And what was awesome about it, with all of their debates, whether it was who would win Superman versus the Hulk, or who should win Best Leading Actress, or the greatest singers of all time, not only would they share their opinions, but they would go back and give each other textual evidence. So they're doing all these things that I wanted them to do in class, but they were talking about the things that they wanted to talk about outside of class, and that's what moved them to contribute. So one day, during one of these conversations about the top 5 lyricists of all time, I went ahead and contributed, obviously Black Thought. But after that, the bell is ringing and the kids are going out of class and we're wrapping up lunch, and I pull one of my students aside and I ask him, well, it wasn't really an ask, it was just kind of an observation. So I'm noticing every time you come into my class, you and your classmates come into my class, I can't get a thing out of you. But when we're here, y'all have everything to say, and y'all are always going back to the text, going back to the music, going back to the lyrics. What is going on? It wasn't profound. It wasn't, I need to make a statement for you, Mr. Sellars. It was just plain and simple. My student told me, Sellars, what we talk about in class is whack and boring. And then he went off to class. It was the equivalent of him giving me the time. It is 1:35. The books you read are whack, and yeah, I gotta get to 4th period. But it did make me think about what we're doing in our classrooms that disengages students. So I turned to a couple thinkers, and in particular, I turned to John T. Guthrie. So John T. Guthrie is a professor who focuses specifically on student motivation and reader motivation and engagement. And he argues that the components that are necessary for student engagement, that are necessary for that student buy-in, come down to 3 bigger ideas: interest, confidence, and dedication. Now, he doesn't necessarily give us a sequential order to these things, but in my mind, when I think about those 3 ideas, interest in the topic or the text, confidence because you have a familiarity with that text and you can speak about your understanding and the dedication that comes as a result of speaking successfully, the thing that comes to my mind is the book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Now here's the thing, because when I was looking at this, it's like, wait a minute, I didn't realize that if you give a mouse a cookie, it's sometimes been used for some really problematic messaging. In this case, I'm thinking more so just about the idea of if one thing happens, then who knows about the other possibilities and consequences? So if you give a mouse a cookie, what happens if you give a student a text that resonates with their identity, that validates their identity? Well, you're already getting them hooked on something because they have an interest that is outside of the classroom that you're bringing into the classroom. There's a sense of confidence because they can speak to it on a personal level. I've studied this, I've lived this, I am this. And then, as a result of being so successful in expressing your understanding, you are far more dedicated. You'll see your students even more dedicated to the idea of engaging with the text. And it all starts perhaps with the cookie of making sure that you honor the interest and the ideas, the experience and the expertise of the students. So here's what I decided to do. I had to make a change. Something was going on in my classroom. It was whack, it was boring, the students were walking out, and they didn't want to talk unless it was around French fries and pizza and who was the best baller. So I thought about how I needed to change, and the one person that came up was my mom. So my mom is super awesome. I know that's not the talk, but I just wanted to say my mom is super awesome. And I'm her youngest, and I'm a mama's boy, and I don't know if it goes hand in hand, but I am not only the youngest of her children, I'm also the pickiest eater. So if we have any parents in here today, if you have a picky eater, on behalf of that picky eater, I just want to say I'm so sorry. I am just so sorry. All those days, all those nights at the dinner table where you're just like, yo, can you just give me 2 bites? Just a couple bites. I was there. I was that kid who was shaking their head, sniffing everything, barely putting the food on my tongue. Like, okay, I tried it. Can I please have my macaroni and cheese now? And so I'm just so sorry. My mom and dad, they tried everything. They tried bargaining. They tried showing me how good it tastes. They pointed to other people, hey, your older brother is eating his vegetables. Why not be like your older brother? All that bargaining eventually turned to, okay, we're getting frustrated and we're getting worried. Is this boy getting the nutrients that he needs? And it even turned a little bit petty. So here's what happened. After every single struggle dinner that I had, where I just would not eat the food, where I am in a puddle of tears because I just don't like the taste of something, I noticed a pattern. That night, every single night that I had one of those bad dinner days, the bedtime story that we read was the one and only Gregory the Terrible Eater. I have read and been read to by this book so many times. So for those of y'all who aren't familiar with Gregory the Terrible Eater, it is a story of a goat who does not eat all the things a goat should eat. So we're talking the goats are eating old shoelaces, tires, and tin cans, and here comes Gregory just causing all of the fits and all the worries for his parents because he wants to eat fruit and vegetables and actual food. Every single night when I did not eat my dinner, Gregory the Terrible Eater would come out. And the shade that my mom would throw whenever we're reading, I wonder how Gregory's parents feel when he doesn't eat. Wow. Well, at the end of the book, Jabari, Gregory's eating all the food that he should. Even at that age, I knew, like, wait a minute, this is just not me learning how to read here. Y'all are sending messages. My mom is out here letting me know that I'm doing something wrong. And even going petty with Gregory the Terrible Eater did not work. So my mom decided to change up her style. She was always my mom, but after Gregory didn't work, she decided not only to be a mother, not only to be this awesome person, but she was going to turn into a con artist, turn into a grifter. And so she starts to hide vegetables and nutrients in the foods that I love. All of the fights during dinner, they stop. And here I am thinking, well, I'm the winner. I'm eating my mac and cheese. I'm eating my pizza. I'm drinking my chocolate milk. I don't have to worry about these vegetables. Years down the line, I come to realize that my mom is mixing in protein powder with all of my Nesquik. That she's hiding leaves of spinach under the cheese whenever we make pizza, lying to me saying, oh, that's just basil. Just basil. She's also putting in little broccoli florets into all my pasta and just covering them up with cheese. So I'm getting these nutrients without even knowing them. She decided if this boy will not eat these vegetables, will not eat healthy willingly, then I'm going to do it in a different way. I'll make him eat it in a different way. My mom decided to start hiding the vegetables in the cake. And so when I look back and I thought about my kids, I have to do the same thing. I've got to hide the vegetables in the cake. And so that takes the form of adding popular culture, adding popular media into my curriculum, into existing curriculum, to facilitate understanding and to facilitate learning. So what does that look like? That looks like taking a pause and getting out of the traditional canonical book and running a film festival for 2 weeks, where my students are analyzing the cinematic techniques as well as the narratives of films. It takes the form of doing an album analysis. Yes, we're in the poetry unit, but you can break down and you can complete a scansion of a poem, even if it takes the form of your favorite song and your favorite album. You can school me on the production. You can explain to me the impact of the lyrics. And you can even venture into the forest of authorial intent without cracking open that particular book that just doesn't speak to you. Now, above everything that really made an impact in my classroom, it was the use of comic books. Now, there are a couple misconceptions about comic books, especially in the educational world, and they are as follows. One, many people believe comics to be a genre, as opposed to a medium. So when I bring up the fact that I'm teaching comics in my classroom, oh no, you don't need comics. You know what you need? You need more creative nonfiction. It's like, well, I can get that in the comic book form. The second misconception is that all comics are connected to superheroes. Well, I don't really want to incorporate that into my classroom. It's always just spandex-clad capes and cowls. That is only one kind of a comic book story. That's only one genre that has so many other subgenres. And then last but not least, the big thing. Comics as a whole are just not real literature. But I'm here to tell you it's actually some of the dopest literature known to really invigorate a classroom, to spark conversations with students, whether it's from K-12 into college, or if you're not a student in a classroom, but a student in life. Because comics can do three things. Comics have the ability to, one, facilitate a deeper understanding of something. My students really did not understand the messages and the symbolism of Lord of the Flies, of a bunch of boys running half naked on an island, and this is supposed to speak to humanity and human capability. But if we start teaching allegory first by looking at, say, the X-Men, then there's a greater level of familiarity with my students. Oh, I've seen these movies. Oh, I know about the X-Men. I can make connections between what it means to be a mutant and perhaps what it means to be a marginalized member of society. It can extend literary analysis. So yes, we have to read Romeo and Juliet, but after that, I can give them Ronald Wimberly's Prince of Cats, and we can read excerpts from that piece that examine the story of these star-crossed lovers from the perspective of Tybalt in a different world, using similar language. Or it could all out replace a book. 9 times out of 10, we have students who want to read, who want to contribute, who want to bring themselves into a classroom, but they're handed books, they're handed lesson plans, they're made to engage in lessons and units that don't speak to them. Instead of going with the typical Bildungsroman, instead I go with, say, American-born Chinese, and we examine the ideas of identity from there. So whether it was using Icon to examine the conversation between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, using Toil and Trouble to talk more about the characters of the Weird Sisters or the Sisters 3 in Macbeth, or just, as I said, all in out replacing a book with American-born Chinese, I've had the ability to connect with my students because they are familiar with the medium and they appreciate a different approach to education. So what happens? My most reluctant readers start flipping through the books. My readers who love to consume literature recognize that, wow, this is a different medium, but I'm still being made to think in the deepest ways. This moves to book clubs, to film outings, to conversations about creating their own comics, to creating their own playlists that speak to a character. The possibilities are endless, but the thing that has to happen first is we had to consider what is wrong with education, what is wrong with our curriculum right now. And in the class, while I had so many colleagues tell me this is an awesome idea, I also had so many colleagues who have been pushing back. Now let's talk about these gatekeepers again. For many gatekeepers, there are reasons for pushing back against a new idea, pushing back against a new concept. And for me, it comes down to three reasons. The first reason is that they believe that their experiences and their preferences are the universal standard. Maybe in your creative space, you have heard, well, this is how I learned it back then, this is how it needs to be, or this is a timeless work that needs to be read. The second thing is, they oftentimes lack familiarity with this new idea, and if you aren't super familiar with it, then that means you can't necessarily stand on a space of expertise. And walking down that pedestal and being a learner as opposed to being the expert is something that is hard for a lot of people, especially the people who are out here gatekeeping. And then finally, these gatekeepers are unable to recognize the connection between these new ideas and these older ideas. They're unable to recognize the ways in which this new thing accomplishes the same goals as the previous idea, whether it's in education, in arts, in philosophy. So for me, I had parents, teachers, principals question so many things that I did. I remember when I was using X-Men Days of Future Past to speak about dystopian novels, and I had a colleague walk in and say, that's really interesting, but are you going to read Fahrenheit 451? That's really cool, but are you also going to read Fahrenheit 451? Because that's the only book that I can really think of that speaks to the end of the world. I remember I had parents who were up in arms wondering, how in the world can a reading of Lone Wolf and Cub be elevated literature? I am worried about my students being ready for college. How is a reading of this manga going to do anything for my kid? And last but not least, I remember when one of my administrators just explained to me, these comics are going to be great for a book club, but in your classroom, we have real work to do, so we need real books and we need real stories. This is just my experience in the classroom. Think about your experience in your world. Think about your experience when you're creating, what messages you receive, direct and indirect, that speak to you and discourage you from creating, discourage you from speaking out, or from trying something new because it does not fit a particular definition. At this point, y'all, we have to stand up to gatekeeping. We have to end the gatekeeping because that space for reflection and innovation is too important to surrender. So what does that look like? What form does challenging the gatekeepers take for you? So for me, it took the form of changing my curriculum even if I had people shaking their heads and wondering how this is educational. Maybe it's speaking up and speaking out. Maybe it is redirecting your energy in a way that is fulfilling you, that is touching the people that you want to recognize, that is giving voice to ideas that oftentimes are quelled down. And I know this is mad abstract, but that's the point. Because the idea of gatekeeping is something that goes beyond the classroom, it's something that goes beyond the art studio. But then again, I'm thinking about my kids. I think about my students, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, 9th grade in particular, and the messages they receive day in, day out about what they should be, what they shouldn't be, how they should act, what is a good thing to pursue, what is a good idea to have, why they should be creating. And it's interesting because it may start as they are teenagers, but it doesn't end. We can all speak to the fact that it doesn't end. That messaging of, are you sure this is what you want to do? No one else has really done it this way. Are you sure that this is going to be the move? But what does that look like to you? To challenge people's ideas, to challenge people's purview or their perspective of what is the right thing to create. At the end, I need you to know that when I changed up my curriculum, I did it, yes, because the kids saw it as whack and as boring. But if we pull back, what they're telling me is, this is whack and this is boring because I don't see myself in it. because this doesn't speak to my world, because I don't have a platform from which I can speak my understanding aside from your very rigid and very narrow-minded idea of you have to write this paper or you can only speak when I acknowledge you. I changed my curriculum because I wanted to make sure that my students had a message or received a very important message. What you do, who you are, what you want to do, who you want to be, not only matters in this space, but is celebrated, is integral to this space. So in the face of gatekeepers, in the face of those who would tell you what you're doing, what you're about, what you're trying to do, what you aspire to do, is something that is too out there, that does not quite fit. I tell you what you're working on, what you believe in, what you want to say, what you have to say matters, and it is powerful. And above all things, y'all, you got this, especially if that category is video games, because y'all can crush it. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate this.